All right, and I think we are live. I'm just going to check some of my settings real quick. Sorry, I'm a little late today. Was trying to do a quick review of the code to make sure I still remember everything. So let's give it a few minutes before I get started. Just going to check the audio settings, make sure everything is okay. If you are already live and in the chat, definitely leave a message about who you are, what's your name, where you're coming from, things like that. Always good to interact with folks. All right, let me check to make sure the audio is good. Yep, audio sounds pretty good. All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. A couple of things first before is I did make the repository for all of the code that we're going to go over today, which is only going to be more at a higher level, publicly available at the OpenClin Tech GitHub repository. So let me actually link that right now. So you can go ahead and browse the code yourself as we are going through this or on your own time. I'm just going to post this in here in the chat, but I'm also going to post this in a little thing here so people can see it. Okay, so if you go over to that website, which is live now, you can see all the code that we have. It's an MIT license, so you can do whatever you want with the code. Now, unfortunately, as I was going through the code, if you're not familiar with this app, I wrote this in about 3 days, and the code is pretty messy. So I wouldn't necessarily use this as a model for how you would write your code, but just so more so to give you an idea of what goes into an app like this. So you can go there and check it out. I'll post it in the description of the video as well. But what we're going to start off first is just to show you a demo of the app so you know what we can do with the code we've written. So let me go ahead and start sharing my screen here. I'm going to share this screen. Here we go. And let me get rid of the caption now. Okay. All right. So the way this works, and just give context again, my grandma was having a lot of issues with her blood pressure, and I was really struggling to communicate with her care providers the issues that we were having without having some sort of visual, because there's so many values in the blood pressure and it was fluctuating so much throughout the day that I wanted to collect as much data as possible and be able to visualize it and share that with the care team so we can make an informed decision based on a lot of data. So that's where this came from. And so if you look at this right now, the way it's laid out on the left-hand side are some key insights. So the big heavy hitters of like, are we in goal? Are we doing better? Are we not? What are some of the key averages, the lows and the highs? And on the right side is more of a dynamic thing, which is modeled after my favorite report in Epic, which is the accordion reports, where you just kind of like enlarge or condense the data to really get at the type of trends you're looking for. So I'll show you what I mean. So right now, the blood pressure trends, you can trend it daily. So you can see all the trends, and there's a little tooltip that shows you what the numbers are. And then the dates over here on the bottom, along with like kind of a legend that shows you how many total readings we have. And then the nice thing is like the daily ones, you can it's kind of hard to read over time. So as we manage the blood pressure changes, we want to be able to summarize it into something more aggregate. So the weekly one is a little easier to see, and it's aggregated by week if we're doing better or worse. So originally it was getting worse, then it was starting to get better, and that's when I stopped doing this. And there's a monthly, which actually doesn't work that well. The other thing is, if you work with hypertension or managing blood pressure in general, you know that there's usually a difference between morning blood pressures and evening blood pressures, where usually your blood pressure elevates a little bit in the morning. And so to make sure we are addressing the blood pressure issues adequately, I thought it was very important to separate those to better monitoring that. And so you can do this here, where you can just toggle this to see that the morning blood pressures are indeed higher than evening. And you can also see that on the left here, where the morning averages just tend to be higher overall. So that's that. The other thing that's important is as we started managing it is I realized we also have to track it along with different events. In this case, medications, how we administer meds, the time of when we administer meds, and then any types of med changes like adding or removing. So I have this tab up here that allows us to overlay medication events with the blood pressures. So you can see that over here. And there's a legend down here of things like the blues are when medications were added. We were adding clonidine. We were giving clonidine ad hoc when the blood pressures were elevated. And then we were replacing meds. And I don't remember why I was tracking this. I just wanted to see if there's any influence in when the med was replaced, but really was not. And then another thing is late doses. So if a medication was late, then of course it'll impact the blood pressures. So we were trending these things. So the greens, you can quickly see the blood pressures will go up pretty high, and then you get a ad hoc dose and it'll go right back down. And then the reds again are late doses where it was late, and then at that time it was averaging above 200. So this really helps to paint a picture of like the ad hoc doses are important. When you're giving meds late, that's bad, and really drives the conversation of what are the recommendations, which are like maybe we should add a medication that is long acting. Maybe we should up the dose of clonidine if the ad hoc doses weren't dropping and dropping the blood pressures enough, but it was. So you get an ad hoc dose here, and it dropped down to like 144. So these are the kind of things that I was trying to go after, and it worked really well in making the changes. And we don't actually use this anymore. So now let's talk a little bit about the architecture of creating something like this. And this is built using a framework that I love using right now called NextJS. It is a full stack framework for basically creating these types of applications that have the front end, which is what you see here, like the UI, and then the back end, like all the things you do with the data, getting the data, manipulating the data, and then giving the data to the UI to show on the screen. That's what Next.js does. And it's a very fun framework that's fairly, I don't know, fun to work with. Just to say, too, if you have any questions, feel free to leave it in the comments as I go along. And let us start with some of the overall architecture. So the code gets very confusing because when I went over the code, just an hour ago, I forgot how complicated it was, but it wasn't just complicated, it was very messy. I didn't organize the code very well because I didn't intend to deploy this or anything like that. So what I'm going to do is start off by drawing a conceptual diagram of Next.js, like how you think through building something like this, and then kind of how we architect this piece, this application. So when you work with Next.js, there's two key parts. There is a client. I don't like this. There's a client, okay? And then there is a server. Now, if you're not familiar with what these are, the client is basically the UI, okay? Some people call it or you can think of it as like the front end. All right, it's what you see, it's what you just saw. So it's the design of what that looks like, the interactions, the buttons, all those kind of things. That's the client, okay? And then when you have the server, that's basically the backend. It's everything that uh, happens behind the scenes, the data, grabbing the data, manipulating the data, doing things with the data, and giving that data back to the client. So that's Next.js. And this is when you combine these two, this is usually like kind of thought of as a full stack because there's engineers that usually work on the back end, and then there's engineers that usually work on the front end. But when you work on both and you know how to put them two together to create an application, that becomes full stack. Now, because there's a lot of data in applications, there's another big piece, and that big piece is, of course, a database for your data. And so a full stack application usually has these other pieces too, like a database, because you need to grab the data from somewhere to do something with it and display it back to the client. Now, how does this all work together? And this is what the application does is when you open an application like the one you just saw on the screen, you see something, but the moment you open it, it actually does something in the back end, which is I need to go grab the data. And so what it does first, right when you open it, is it will go to the server. You tell the server like, "Hey, I want to see the blood pressure medications." And if I go back to my screen real quick, right here, it's already defaulted to this. So it's just going to pull all the data and organize it like this with no filters. Okay, so this is the default setting. It's going to go ahead and go to the server. Let me go back here and say I want all the data to be pulled back, no filters. So it's going to go here. And then the server is gonna say, okay, I need to grab data. It'll go and go to the database. It will grab all of the data that we need, which is both vitals, or actually it's just vitals. There's no medication events yet because we didn't hit that toggle. And then it will get the data back. The database will send it back to the server. The server will provide the data to the client, and the client will show all the data in those different boxes and things like that. Okay. That's like Next.js in a nutshell. And that's also how this application works. Now, something to explain before I go through some of this is that in Next.js, a lot of people like the idea, or at least I like the idea of um, this is more like a Next.js concept. It's called a server component. So the very first page you see, it's can be either a client component or a server component. If it's a client component, you have to go through this whole kind of thing here where it's like, okay, I load the page, I go to the server, I grab data from the database, I bring it back to the server, and I show it back to the client. That whole round trip takes time. And one of the things that Next.js tries to optimize is to reduce that time because people like things speedy. So they have a concept called server components. And what the server component is it knows like this application right now, I want to grab all the data for blood pressure. And so I'm going to go ahead and do that ahead of time and cache it in the background. So it already knows I want all data. So I already grabbed the data and it will bring it back and cache it for us. And what you do in this case when you're designing the application is that very first page you see is a server component, and then you will pass that data to all the different client. And usually we call these are like, oops, to all the different UI things, which we'll call client components. And so what does that look like? Let me show you. Let me go into the GitHub repository, which is public. This is a typical layout of a Next.js app. So at the very top page is this, lots of different files, but there's usually a source folder. If you click on that, there is, actually, let me go back down. Oh yeah, a source folder. And then there is an app. So this is our blood pressure app. And then this is, you can think of as the entry point to your Next.js application. Okay, it's also the entry point to our blood pressure application. And the convention that you see in Next.js is this page.tsx, which is a React component written in TypeScript. And this is what you first see when you open the app. And so what happens is I am saying, let me see here, at the very bottom here, I will grab all the data first. What we were saying at first is a server component. If it's a client component, there would be something that says use client at the very top. But don't worry about all the syntax or all of the nitty gritty things here. What I want you to understand from this is the moment you open this app, because this is the entry point to the app, you will go ahead and fetch data. And this right here is the very first thing. This says, I want to grab all of my vitals data. I use something called Prisma, which I'll explain in just a little bit. But basically, it says I want to grab all my vitals from my database and I will store it in this variable called vitals. Okay. And then next, I want to reformat that data into a shape that my chart can use. So that's the whole blood pressure chart. There's a lot of different things here, like converting uh, the dates I use, like 1 p.m., 4 p.m., into an ISO string, splitting it out if it's morning or evening, and then making sure it fits in the shape of my chart. Same thing here. We have medication events. I go ahead and fetch all of that at once to grab all that data and store it in a variable called medication events. Okay. And then I also here reformat it so I can use it in my chart. And so what happens is once you have all that data, and because it's in a server component, it's all cached, we take that data and we will pass it to client components. And these right here are client components. And hopefully it is very understandable. There's two client components here where we take the data and we pass it to. There's a summary sidebar and there's a chart toggle. So if I go back to my app, there's two big parts. This is their sidebar. This is basically your chart toggle. So I pulled all the data from the database and then I will populate everything here. And this is a very common framework when using Next.js because when you do it this way, when you are publishing the application, everything is cached, it's snappy, it's fast, everything loads really fast. So here is what we were just looking at. That was a server component. We grabbed all the data from the database and the data, and it already has the data, and then we pass that to the client component. So if we want to break this down just a little bit more, what you saw is that there were two client components, right? There is, oops, a vital sidebar. And then there is a chart toggle. Hopefully that makes sense. Data pulls back to the client, and the client will populate these two things. Let me just show it to you in the code again. Entry point to the app, fetched all the data in a server component, passes all the data to these two client components down here, and that populates these two things. Just make sure there's no questions. No questions. Sorry, you guys are a quiet crowd. Okay, so let's continue going on. So that is that. Let me explain this part a little bit, okay? So the data that's being populated, you saw Prisma earlier. Let me just show you that again. Prisma is not the database. I actually don't remember the acronym, or it's an ORM. I think it's Object Relational Manager or something like that. ORM Prisma. Let me see. Object Relational Manager. Okay. So let me go here. What we actually do, not everyone likes this. I just like it because it's very developer friendly. If you don't want to work with SQL directly, or you just like very strong types, which I do, I love using ORMs. It adds a lot of extra stuff, but I've gotten used to it. I kind of like this, but it's a way of, oh, I'll show you. It'll make more sense once you look at the code. What happens is your server interacts with something called a ORM. In this case, it is, let me type up the full word so you know what it is. It is a object relational mapper, ORM. In this case, Prisma. And I really like this because it's very user friendly when you look at the schema of the different tables. So it actually does this in the background. And I feel like this is pretty popular with a lot of full stack apps. A lot of people use ORMs. Maybe I shouldn't say a lot, maybe some percentage. It seems to be a decent percentage that use ORMs to do this. So usually your server is talking to the ORM, in this case Prisma, and Prisma will write the SQL queries, because in this case, I'm using an SQL database, to pull the data that you need. It'll go back here. Prisma will send it back to the server. So there's like some middleman in this case. All the full stack applications I use or I've created use Prisma, and a lot of people I know also do this as well. And so why do we do this? There's a lot of different reasons. Let me show you one of them, at least one of the ones that I like. So if I go back to the management app, when you're working with something like an ORM, or in this case, Prisma, usually it's on its own folder that's outside of the source folder. Okay, so this is Prisma here. Here's your ORM. And in that file is a file that you'll always see when you're working with Prisma is called schema.prisma. It's actually one of the reasons why I really like ORMs. It's because all of the schemas just in this one code base. You can easily see it. And all you do in this case is you define the different types of data and all of the data elements within these different objects. So here I'm using a SQL database, in this case, SQLite. I usually use Postgres databases when I'm using in production. This was just for fun. So this is a very quick and dirty database. And maybe just a quick note about this. Why did I use this? Is because the database lives just right here. Other types of databases, like I use Supabase quite a bit. There's a lot more integrations and complexity that goes into it, and I just didn't want to do that for this project. Anyways, it's a SQL database. And what's nice about it is you have all of the different objects defined here. And we use TypeScript to keep it all nice and strongly typed so you know what is in that data. So this is a vital, which is not a blood pressure, it's a conceptual vital sign. The type can be a blood pressure. I was planning on doing other things like respiratory rate, weight, um, heart rate, things like that, but I didn't do that. But this is a blood pressure. I ended up not using value, and the two values here actually were split into systolic and diastolic because I wanted to combine the values and then a timestamp. So that's your vital. And then medication event is, of course, the things that happen when medications are added or removed, things like that. So that's pretty simple too. You always use like a UUID, which is great for referencing. There's a date time, and then there's a medication event type. In this case, these are the ones that I noted earlier. I wanted to know about these things like med added, ad hoc dose. You can store these in an enumerated value or enum, and that's if you have concepts that don't change often and there's only a couple of them, usually I put it in enum for just more type safety. And so we have this here in your medication event. This is one of the reasons why I like Prisma. And then when you're querying, let me see if I go back to the code. If you're querying data from the database using Prisma, it's easy to read. Now, you can argue that it's easy to read SQL too, but I think this is really nice. Let's see, I'll go back here. So here's the code, right? So you have a constant called vitals or variable. And what we're doing is we are to pull it, instead of writing SQL, all I got to do is do Prisma dot from what object. So you just saw the objects that were in there. There's the vital object. And then I will find many, which is just grab multiple values. And that is it. This is basically your SQL query. And it's just so much more abstract that I really like working with it. And so this is basically grabbing it by ascending and then looking at all the different types that are blood pressure. So it's fairly simple to use. So that is Prisma. Hopefully that makes sense. Let me make sure. Oh, there's a question from Drod. Are there different ORMs that you like? That's a good question. There is another ORM called Drizzle that a lot of people like. Let me see if I can Drizzle Prisma ORM. I have not used it. I've thought about using it, but let me see if I can share the screen. A lot of people are starting to use Drizzle. It's very lightweight. It's very fast. It executes your queries very fast. I think it's the most performant. Prisma has a lot of other things and dependencies baked in, so it's a little slower. There's a lot of arguments out there about it. They have their pros and cons. I like Prisma because of the way you define the schema and how you write them. It just looks more clean. Okay. Anyways, let's keep going on. So we let me see where I can go from here. The ORM, the database, the server. Let me just go through some of the actual code now. So if I go into, let's see here. Oops. Let's go back into the code. And for those who are watching or who are interested in looking at the GitHub repository, this right here is so this is your main entryway again into a Next.js app. I like to organize my files by features nowadays. The way this repository is organized is not the way I like to code. Um, and so what I mean by that is when you have a feature like blood pressure, this would have been a blood pressure management tool. There could have been other types of monitoring tools within this app. This is organized by a folder. And within this folder, I like to organize it by like the different UI components that are in there, the different utilities, any database calls, all of that organized neatly within here. This app is not live. I was in the process of converting it to that, but I don't do that here. So now let's look at the code underlying this. So if I go into the main entryway, which is the page.tsx, at the very bottom, hopefully you understand that we are doing database calls here, where we're formatting the data here, and then we pass the data to these two UI components. So let's take a look at the code there. Let's start with the vitals summary sidebar, okay? And so if I go back to the app in the source, there is a folder for components. Components are all of your UI components. I should talk about ShadCN at some point, but let's hold off on that for a second. So in my components is where I will put everything I have that displays to a user. Now, going back to what I said earlier, I like to organize things by feature now. So I would usually group all of those UI components within its respective feature because this application is just a blood pressure management application. I just have everything here. So we have the summary sidebar component here. So again, this is what the user sees. So we have the data and it goes into this summary sidebar. In this summary sidebar, you can see it's a client component at the very top. This is the use client. The way I usually like to write these client components is I write functions. Maybe I need to do like certain math. So do I have a math here? Yeah, I have some like math that I want to do. I have some filtering that I want to do. You write all of these things and up at the very top, and then you will take the data and write out what the user sees a little lower. So in this case, in the summary sidebar, if we go back over here, there's a couple of things I wanted to do, right? This I actually split into its own component. And I know I'm all over the place with this because it's been so long since I looked at the code. As you're writing out these components, the code gets very long and it's very difficult to understand your code quickly. So as the code gets too long, I like to split things into its own thing. So this is the whole summary sidebar. The goals was it was getting pretty long, so I split it into its own thing. And then so you can see that over here, this is the summary sidebar. I actually have it in its own component called goal summary. And so all of the code for the goal summary, maybe we'll start there. So we're in the summary sidebar. You saw that we are grabbing the goal summary from somewhere else. So let's actually look at that code instead. This is in components vitals goal summary. If we go back to components, there is vitals and goal summary. And so you can see this one already is 109 lines of code. So what we do here is, hopefully we can match this. Again, write all the functions at the very top before passing the data that the user sees. So the first thing I want to do is I wanted to write a function that shows if they were in good control or not. So that's this thing right here. It's just this little word. So it's poor control right now. I wanted to be able to very quickly label or categorize whether or not they were good control or bad control. I don't remember if I actually did any research on the percent in gold that I would label it, but in the code, I set it to if at least 75% of the readings were at goal, then I would say ideal. If they were greater than 50, then it would say it could be improved. And anything that was not greater than or equal to 50, it would be in poor control. So in this case, the calculated percent of blood pressure readings in goal were 39, so it's less than 50. So this right here is poor control. Okay. So that's just one function, which is used by something down here. This is the actual component of that part you see for the goal summary. So it does a couple of things. It first checks to see that there's a value that is actually specified and it's not null. It's always good to check, otherwise it could throw your application into some errors. I want to check if it was in range or not. And so I want to very quickly know if they were in goal range. You do some different maths. And in this case, I did some calculation where I took the first half of the reading. So the very first, whatever the total number of readings was. So I think this one was 243. But as it grows, it doesn't matter what the number is. It'll just basically take what the total number of readings is and divide it in half. And then the first half, stored it in a variable called first half, and the second half in second half. And the reason why I was doing that was because I wanted to have some way of telling, are we trending better or trending worse? And this is how I created this trending feature. So this is the first half of readings compared to the next half. Okay. And then in this one, we did some more math here. This was calculation of the percentages. Um, and then at the very bottom, we return all of these. So there's an assessment, a trend, and a goal. So this is your assessment, trend, and goal. And all of those data that we calculated, we reshaped, we enriched, gets displayed over down here. Hopefully this makes sense. I didn't want to go too deep into the different things because I also don't remember all the pieces. But hopefully that makes sense. And so if we go back over here, this vital sidebar actually has a goal summary component too. Oops. I think the other ones are just all in one piece. Again, the reason why you split these is because it gets very unwieldy when you have so much code in one. I think it becomes like a couple hundred lines of code. And for me personally, it's really hard to read. So I like to split things into meaningful domain specific types of components, everything else. So if we go back here, that's the goal summary. Let's go back to the summary sidebar. So that's right here. So we're importing that component that we created for goals into this. And then you can see at the very bottom of every client component, there's a return. So we return, and you see how simple this is? I just return that entire component and it will display just like this. And to do that, we also needed the data. So in this component, we passed the data that we had from the vitals. And then the rest of the stuff, like down here, is basically the rest of the component. So if you look at the component over here, I have a section for averages, highest BP, lowest BP, morning versus evening. I go down here and we will have something very similar. So we have your averages down here. We have your highest BP over here, lowest BP over here, and then morning versus evening. Now, you see how this is 215 lines of code? You can argue that it's not that many, but if I were to build this out a little more, I like to modularize my code as much as possible, separate them into smaller chunks. So it's just easier to triage issues and even have other people, if you're working with a big team, you can have them work on a little small part of it. So I would turn this entire thing right here that's highlighted into its own component and just import it in and just do something like this. So then it's very clean and understandable how these client components are created. Hopefully that makes sense. So those are your components. Let me see. To me, this is a good time to show ShadCN. or talk a little bit about ShadCN. So if we go back here, there's a lot of things that can be said about the design of an application. Like if you look at this, right? The the boxes that you see, the lines that you see, even these like tabs over here, all of these have styling to it, like the color, the text, the shape, all these kind of things. I mean, I care about those things, but I don't care so much to the point where I want to always choose the specific font, the sizes, the margins, all of those kind of things. So when you're working, especially as a front end developer, there's a lot of different libraries out there that have already thought through this and have designed components, specifically client components that people see, in a way that is like easily reusable. They are modularized. They accommodate things for people who may have disabilities, color blindness, for example. All of these things are thought through. One of the most popular component libraries right now is something called ShadCN. And it took me a while. For when I first tried to use a component library, this is ShadCN. Let me just go here. When I first used a component library, I was using Material UI, which is the one created by Google. But a lot of people have started to use ShadCN. It's very clean, it's minimal, and for purposes like mine, I don't really care too much of designing this because there's a lot of HTML involved, CSS involved, Tailwind involved that I just don't want to deal with. So what I usually do when I'm designing something, I will come into ShadCN and look for different components that I want to use in my application. So for example, something that is very popular is a card. So a card, and what's nice is it actually shows you a preview of it. This is a card. It's literally like a box. And you can even see the code for it. And they show you how you can use it, and it's very nicely described. Okay. And so when you have a card, basically you can say, when I have some data that I pull from my server, render this card and whatever else you want to put inside. So this is like a login, email, password. There's probably some login, email, password. Like all of this is all written for you. Otherwise, you would be writing this yourself. And it's super simple because what happens is in your code, you simply, let me see, what am I doing here? You simply import the things from ShadCN and you can use it and populate the card with all the things you have. So the card comes with like a card title, a card description, there's buttons, and all those kind of things in there. So it's really, really nice. Let me show you an example of it in the code. So if I go back to components, chart toggle, which one has a card? Let me see if I can find one with the card. App page. I think the summary sidebar was also a card. Let me take a look. Import card. Oh, maybe the goal summary was vitals. No, I didn't use card for these. I think I used it in chart events. Yeah, here it is. So I used it here. So this giant graph here is in a card, okay? And it's very nice because then what you do is you import the ShadCN component, which is a client component. It's called card. You can see what it looks like from the website from ShadCN. And all you do when you're writing your code, we go down to the return. You use these in the return because in a client component, this is what the user sees. You want to return something. In this case, I want to return a card. So the card is that blood pressure graph. And I just populate it with the data that we modified up here and up here. So we have the card component. I can add the card header, the title. I can add different tabs, which is another ShadCN component, which is tabs. So if you go back over here, here's the card. Here is different tabs. These are all, it's very nice. So a lot of that code has been written for me in the form of ShadCN, and I just grab it. And what's nice about it as well is when you're using ShadCN, let me go back over here, and you want to use one of the components like, hey, I want to use these cards, or let me go back over here to ShadCN. I want to use a checkbox. Maybe you're creating something that uses a checkbox, or maybe you're using something that is a button, which is pretty popular, right? All you do is in your terminal when you're working on your app. Let me see. I wish I had an app. Oh no, let me go here. All you do in your terminal is you do this. It's so nice. You just say npx shadcn at latest, and you add whatever component you want. And that will automatically, if you don't have a folder already, go into your source folder, create a components folder if you don't have one, create a UI folder if you don't have one, and add that shadcn component here with all of the code required that does the nice, beautiful thing it does. And this is, I didn't write any of this code. It's just straight from shadcn. I bring this up because it's really nice to not have to think about the design when you're working on these different features. You can just reuse a lot of these things that's already pre-built for you in ShadCN. And if you really wanted to, you can come in here to the code and just customize it as needed. So it's really nice. Carrie's here saying, good to see you. So glad to catch this, but missed the bulk of it. Thanks, Carrie. You can always go back and rewatch from the beginning if you want. Just talking through some high levels of the blood pressure app. The repository, if you guys came in late or something, is public, so you can always watch the code, which is here. And you can go take a look at the code yourself. All open MIT license. Okay, so hopefully you have some understanding. Like, I'm not going to obviously teach you how to create something like this. It would just take too much time, and it's been so long since I looked at the code that I don't remember how I wrote some of this. But anyways, that hopefully will give you some idea of like how these things are created. So all these components, like these are all domain specific things. And each of these things, you can think of as being made up of different shadcn components to create some domain specific component. And in this, these shadcn components, you might use cards for many different things, and they just end up being reused in all your other UI components. So that's kind of the big picture with client components. You grab data, you can manipulate it here. Another thing you can do, maybe I'll show in the code base, is a lot of people usually have libraries or utilities. Where's my utils? Utils. I don't even remember where it is. Oh, here it is, utils. Yeah, the utilities. So utilities is like, it helps you do different functions. So some people like to store it in utilities. I do that too. And so, oh, I don't have it in here. Where did I store it? Oh, I think I have it in here. You can do things like this. Like you have utilities and the idea is you can reuse it in different places. So I have a simple utility that would just calculate the average of one or more numbers. I think in this case, it's an average of an array. So you can reuse these functions. You basically would import this function from this utility into whatever client or server component to do some sort of calculation. Okay, let's talk a little bit about, let's see, not in here. Let's talk maybe now about the data. Maybe I'll talk just a little bit about the data because that part's pretty interesting. So there's many different ways you can get data into your database. So of course, in this case, me use the system architecture. Data didn't exist in here before, right? You have to get data in here some way. So you need some sort of file. right? You need some sort of file or files that make its way into the database. And this is something that's really important, especially when you're developing new applications. Is like, okay, I have the code. I need data to see if it works or not, right? So in this case, there's many ways you can do this. The way I did it is I had a CSV or multiple CSVs. I just had a single one because this was a simple use case. Actually, I want to draw it like this instead. Let's do it like this. Sorry, I'm being very type A right now. I have a CSV here, and technically I only have one CSV, so I'm just going to do that to keep it simple. So I have a CSV file that I loaded into the database. Now, typically, when you're working with something like Prisma, or working with any database, there's ways to load it into the database. Prisma has a function that's called seed. Many databases in general, or ORMs, have ways to seed the database. And so this actually goes in here. And the way I do it, and the way I've enjoyed doing it in different apps, is you write some sort of code, which I'll show you in just a bit. And it's not really a file. I don't know what to call it. There's something. Oh, here, perfect. There's a function. There is a function that you write called c.ts, or you can call it whatever. I can call it like vitals.ts. It's just some function that Prisma can use to grab the data from the CSV and put it into Prisma, and Prisma will load it into your database for you. I don't remember what I called it in here. Let's actually take a look. So in your Prisma folder, this is where all that stuff lives. I like to put all my stuff, the data, in the Prisma folders in the data bucket. So this is where the CSV is located in this case. I have two different examples here. There's the blood pressure one here, blood pressure here. Something important to know, it's kind of implied, but the data in the CSV must match your schema that's in here. So that data must match the object that you defined in your Prisma schema, okay? Hopefully that's implied. So your data here, we have a type, systolic, diastolic. You can see the value is empty because originally I was going to use it, I didn't, and then a timestamp. Now, to get the data into Prisma, you usually, like I said, you need some type of sort, you need a seed file. In this seed file, this is a pretty simple one. Let me make sure I have this right. Okay, yeah, I do. You can split this into many different ways. I'm going to try to not be too nuanced by it. But basically, what I'm saying in this file is Prisma will look at this file to determine what we need to put into the database. In this case, I have a function here. It's called seed vitals from CSV, which hopefully is obvious. It will go into that CSV file called blood pressure CSV. I can change the name here if I wanted to. It will go through every one of those rows, grab all that data. It will map it into that Prisma object for vitals, right? And then here, so you see, this is where we work with Prisma to put into the database. I'm going to use Prisma to put it into the vitals table and create rows of data for vitals. Okay. And then that basically will get that in there. This is, oh, I forgot I seeded medications as well. So that right there, let me bring this back here. This is like seed vitals, or actually it's more like CTS. It's like CTS, which within the CTS function, it will convert that CSV in Prisma to load the data into the database. Did you see something, Carrie? Are you also tracking heart rate? No, I'm not tracking heart rate in this case. Just the blood pressure. There was nothing abnormal with her heart rate, so I just wanted to track the blood pressure. Okay, so that's CTS, and that's how you get data into the database. I then, what was it? All that data then gets loaded into here. There's an easy way to see this if we're using some other database, but all that data gets in here. And basically, whenever you're executing different like Prisma functions, it will pull that data from there. Okay. Let me see if, sorry, we talked about this. We talked a little about the database, getting data into the database. Maybe we'll see if we can, if there's any more about the server we can talk about. So if I go back to the management app, let me go back to the source file, go to app page. I don't think there's too much more. I think most of it was actually in, oh, we looked at vital summary bar. We didn't look at chart toggle. Let's talk about that. And maybe we'll end the video after we talk about the chart toggle. All right, so let me orient you again. We have the data, we pass it to the client. We talked about the vital sidebar already, which is made up of a component called goal summary, and then like everything else is in it. The other thing it shows, which is the main heart of the whole application, is the chart toggle. So the chart toggle, as a reminder, is this entire section over here, okay? It controls a lot of the cool functionality that you see with these like tabs, this is called a switch. This is a ShadCN switch, by the way. So let's talk about this a little more, okay? So that, if we go back to the main entry page, we're at source app page.tsx. We go down here, it is this piece. And what you see here is we pass two parameters into this client component. There's a vitals parameter, which is the same type of data we passed into vitals. But for chart toggle, we also pass events, okay? So let's take a look at chart toggle. If you don't know where it is, all of these things like this syntax, it's usually imported. So if you go at the very top, import chart toggle, it shows you where it's located. So the chart toggle is in our components folder. Let's go back to app, go back to source, components folder, chart toggle. Okay, so what is this chart toggle doing? So this chart toggle, you can see we're importing a couple of things. These are all ShadCN. We got a switch at the very top. We have two different charts. So the way I created this is I created two charts. They're just duplicates of each other, one that has events and one that doesn't. You can kind of tell from up here. This is the one that has events. This is the one that does not. I was just very lazy in the way I created this. But that was a fast way of just duplicating the same component. So there's two components. And then there's some more ShadCN stuff that I just imported. We do some enrichments, some other functions up here. And this is our main function down here, this export default function, the chart toggle. If we go down here, here's our two parameters, vitals and events. Vitals has a type of chart point and events has a type of meta event. And a lot of this just matches your database query. And down here, we are returning different things. So the first thing is I return a events toggle. So this is the switch. This is this thing up here. I'm just basically saying show a toggle, and that toggle will have a name called show medication events, right? Then there's a time filter tab. And so these are your tabs. That's up here, right? And then the very bottom here is this chart display. And so most of this code, so I write a lot of the code like this just to keep it like easier to read. You can see it actually doesn't show that much more of the code. What it does is it will point you to one of two components. You either will show the vital charts with events or the vital with charts. And this one is determined by this here. So what the user selects based on this switch, you either show events or you don't, is what dictates this up here. Hopefully it makes sense. This says if there is a show event, you would do this. Otherwise, that's what this colon is, show the component with no events. Hopefully that makes sense. And then let's show the one with events because that's the one I primarily use. So this vital charts with events is in also the components folder. So go back here. This is the component. Now we are down to this piece. So this is no events, and this is the events. So now I'm looking at the component that has events and all these other things added. There's a question. Can Prisma handle no SQL databases for unstructured data? Does need to be relational? Yeah, that's a really good question. Prisma is primarily designed to handle SQL databases, so primarily relational. There is some really cool things if you like working more so with unstructured data. I've tinkered with it. A lot of the technologies that you see here with like ORMs and relational databases and all these, there's even more things that we can talk about that's not in here. A lot of people start using something called convex. Convex is like your backend as a service thing, and it's a unstructured database that's not relational, and it is, you can check it out. It makes things really easy. There's a lot of cool tutorials on it. It's pretty new, and if you want to work with more unstructured data, you can use this. I'm not a fan of that. I go back and forth sometimes, but I think I really like these working with structured data much more. And there's maybe time and place for both. Okay, let me go back here, chart with events. So in designing this, there's a lot of different imports I use. Recharts is something. So ShadCN, let me go back over here. ShadCN has a bunch of charts, beautiful charts. And that's kind of how I chose this initially. So I didn't design that chart that you saw. I've added some things to it. But I went to ShadCN. They have a nice section where they have different components for charts. And I just picked one I liked. I think I picked a line chart or something like that. I don't know where they are. Oh, line charts. Yeah, I just picked one of these. I think I picked a double one or something like that. And then I started working with that. So I just picked it. You can just add the chart, just like what I showed earlier with the terminal, ShadCN add chart. In this case, it is some of these things. It actually comes from Recharts. It's another library. You got some ShadCN components over here, ShadCN components. This is for caching purposes, some other functions, my other components. In this case, I did some more splits in here. So I did a component for tooltip and one for legend, just to make it more simple. So what that means is down here, this is, I think this is the legend. And then you see when I'm hovering over these values, there's like a little thing that pops up. That's the tooltip. So I created those separately just to make it a little easier and to reduce the code here. So this is 208 lines of code. So I think those are, yeah, down here. So the tooltip, this is a tooltip, nice and simple. Keep it nice and short. And there's a legend, also nice and short. And then we just import it there. And then what's nice about that too is you can reuse those kind of things. So that tooltip, I think I was using in the vitals chart without events. So this is back to the vital charts with events. The thing here, we do some math. I think what I did here is I took all the data. Keep in mind this, where is it? Here it is. Keep in mind we have all the vitals data and events. But if you look at this here, this chart has different aggregations. I think my monthly was broken, but there's like daily, weekly, morning, evening. So what I like to do is I like to get the data once and then do all sorts of manipulations with it, where you store all the data in different variables. So you have the data once here. There's like all the data, and then depending on what is you want to store like different views of it. So it gets a little too much here. I don't want to get too deep into the code. I basically pull the data and I reshape it based on the button that's clicked. So these are all stored. Whatever the users clicked, it's stored, and it'll just render the data that's filtered for whatever the button is. If we go down here, here is the card. This is the main card that you see. It's the title of the card. Here's all our tabs. And then I don't want to try to explain all these. Yeah, I feel like it'll get too deep going into each one of those. Maybe the most unique thing about this is I didn't have a really good way of showing the events. And what I did is for each medication event that I had here, I actually converted it to a data point, like a vitals point, and I enriched it, which is what I called it in here. I enriched it to the nearest vitals point to map what happened right next to that vital. And that's how it displayed. Probably not doing a super good job of explaining this, but hopefully you get the bigger picture. If you have events such as meds, shouldn't you also be tracking? Brian, since they BP are also linked. Certainly can. There's a lot of nice to haves in here, but the context behind this app was like there was big concern that my grandma might stroke out if we didn't do something quickly about her blood pressure. And so I didn't really care about heart rate because that wasn't the primary thing we were tracking at the time. Certainly, we can look at heart rate. Her heart rate was never bradycardic or tachycardic. It was usually normal. The blood pressure is what we were like really striving to look at every single day. And we were titrating her meds based on that. She does have like a beta blocker, so I know we should be looking at heart rate and all these other ones, but it just was not something that I had the time to build. These other things were much more, let's say, urgent to just build something to help guide the conversation. Hopefully that helps. Um, are the chart animations from Shad Cien? Yeah, pretty much. Oh, I shouldn't say there's no animations. I guess there is. Like if you want to look at it like this. I think they're more so from Rechart. So if we go to Shadcien, this is the main Shadcien website. There's a tab for charts. I wonder if they say it here. Recharts. So they basically add a Shadcien layer on top of Recharts. And I think Recharts is where the code is for the interactivity. You can read through it here. I didn't look too deep into it. I love recharts. You can use recharts directly, but Shadcien did a pretty good job of adding their Shadcienish to recharts to make it look really nice. But I think Shadcien was just mainly the styling, and I think recharts is where the interactive parts came in, like the animations. Any trends are you noticing with these events? Yes. So there's different things. I think some of them were obvious. I think the events we were showing, one big thing was like you see these green dots. It showed how effective the clonidine doses were, and it helped dictate whether or not the clonidine doses should be increased or decreased to see if they were working or not. Every single time there was a high number, the moment you give an ad hoc dose, it just dropped right back down. At some point, it didn't drop as much, and the dose was increased, but it just helped reaffirm that the ad hoc doses were great. And then also like pre-clonidine, so this blue is when clonidine was added. Actually, this is a clonidine patch. This is not even an ad hoc dose. You can monitor to see that the clonidine patch was also further smoothing out her lines. So you can kind of see what was working and what was not. And then the weekly helps to tell like, we're doing we were here and then it got a little worse and then it started to trend down. So layering all these things on top really helped. And then the medication events helped tell the story. The big thing was also about like morning and evening. Like everything you can see is like trending down. I guess it's more morning and evening, not the events. But yeah, it was very helpful to see these. I think another thing that was very helpful was the doses were missed. Some people didn't consider it a big idea, like some of the nurses. And if you have visuals to help explain to them, like, hey, yes, it's only 2 hours difference, but look, if you didn't miss this dose, it probably wouldn't be as high. And so these events, again, tell the story and help you make your case about what recommendations to do. Question on the clinical side of things, how did you use the blood pressure monitor as a continuous blood pressure monitor? where you have the patient sit down before testing for the most accurate. Yeah, that's a good question. So the blood pressure monitor, I have a ba, 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 ba. I have a Withings blood pressure connect monitor, and so I was using that to basically capture the data point for my grandma. I would have her sit up on a chair. She'd be sitting there, and after waiting, I didn't always wait 5 minutes. In this case, the trends were bigger than anything. Like I thought that was much more important. But I would have her sit for a bit, making sure she wasn't like getting up and down a lot after a walk or something, but making sure she's been sitting there, she's rested, have her test it or have her sitting there and I'll take the blood pressure. And then just to make sure the numbers were even more accurate is or to substantiate a value, we would do it on both arms. We do it once on one arm, wait a minute, do it on the other arm, and then make sure the values match. And so that was where we were collecting the data, and the data would flow into her iPhone, which was really nice, all nicely connected. And then I would actually manually take those numbers and put it into the CSV that gets read into the database of this application. What would have been nice that I was going to hope to do was have a app on her phone that when she presses it, it will automatically send it into my app. But obviously, again, this was more of an urgent thing that I created. I wasn't trying to turn this into a full app of any kind. But yeah, this is a really good question. Accuracy is pretty big. Part of why I also did it was because I didn't trust some of the people taking the blood pressure. They were taking it in different ways, and I was just making sure that I got as accurate of a blood pressure reading as possible. And most of the blood pressure readings I got were almost every hour, just to see how it trended up and down. So, is it anxiety related if we are noticing a drop with clonidine? Um, No, I think that's a good question. There's a lot of confounding here. Clonidine in itself is going to drop blood pressure anyways, and I think like anxiety is likely a contributing factor, but certainly not the sole factor, right? And the clonidine drop, I think these are like kind of two unrelated topics in some sense. Like they're related, but it's not. Uh, the sole thing, if that makes sense. There is some anxiety involved for sure, though. Um, the whole process of doing the management was fairly complex. Like we're not just talking about optimizing meds, the blood pressure management. It was an entire staff. There's like a lot of people involved, so there was a lot of social things in here. Um, I don't know if that answers your question completely. But okay, what I can say with the outcome of this though is it drove us to have different types of recommendations. I'll give you an example. So you see all the green dots, which indicates a ad hoc clonidine use, which means she had different high levels of blood pressure. All of the values that you see here were collected by me. And the thing is, because we were catching so many high numbers, we made a recommendation to have her blood pressure monitored more often. More often means they can have a standing order of clonidine and give clonidine more often to make sure that she is within normal ranges more often. So that's one of the big recommendations we made. You can see, even after adding meds like clonidine, that her blood pressure still trended pretty high. Like these are pretty scary numbers. We're talking about up in the 200s. So another recommendation that was made is we need to add more medications, not just a clonidine patch. So more medications were added, and we got that titrated. The other thing, as you can tell, there were late doses, and each time the doses were late, they were very high. Like the values were pretty elevated. So another recommendation is just to make sure that doses were given on time. So the outcome from all these things, it's not shown in this graph. Like this is from a while back now. The outcome is she's not had elevated blood pressures in the 200s for probably 2 months, which is really good. Most of her blood pressure numbers are a lot better. I haven't tracked the values since because it's been good. This is all tracked on her iPhone and all the blood pressures. You can see all the trends and it's just doing great. So I have no need to be tracking this manually in my app anymore. And it's good. This the outcome of what I hope to achieve with this app was great. And yeah, I'm really happy. I think we're all happy with it. All right. Hopefully that was interesting. How long? Oh, 1 hour and 11 minutes. Hopefully you got some interesting insight into like kind of the big picture of a Next.js app. We're just doing full stack development. It's pretty fun. Nowadays, there's a lot of ease. You can use like different LLMs to help build this kind of stuff. So you can experiment building like the different server components, the client components, and then abstracting them into these like different domains. And you can prompt them to how you like to organize your files. Let me know if there's other things and just double check there's no other comments or questions and stuff like this. I don't think so. Okay, I think we're good. Yeah, let me know if there's other things you like me to talk about. I'll probably be doing a little bit more of these, maybe more like fire related, especially like the way we connect with different EHRs. I'll probably do more of that. But otherwise, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Hopefully, it was helpful. And hopefully, some of you guys build some of these apps yourself. And then I'll end with looks like Carrie has a comment. Very informative. Love the relational layout and data analysis. And thanks, Carrie. Thanks for joining, and thanks for the questions. Also, thanks, Gerard, for tuning in. And I think someone else did too. Jonathan White. All right, guys. Hope you guys have a nice